Hey there, welcome back to Business as Unusual. In today's episode, we're diving deep with Altagracia Montilla, chatting about everything from the joy of authenticity to building conflict-brave communities, right through to redefining success. It's all about creating the world we dream of, so grab your favorite beverage, get comfy, and let's get started.
Business as Unusual is a thought-provoking podcast that explores the innovative strategies, disruptive ideas, and unconventional practices driving successful leaders and companies in the ever-evolving world of modern business. Subscribe, comment, and share for weekly inspiration with our host, Aicila.
Hi, welcome to Business as Unusual. This is Aicila, and I'm here today with Altagracia Montilla. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Aicila, for having me.
I have been really looking forward to this. We actually started a show a while back, and then some things came up, and we had to put it on pause. And as I was telling Altagracia right before we started recording, I'm actually pretty excited because I think I'm doing a better show now. So you guys can let me know. Obviously, this is her first time. So would you let people know a little bit about what your business is?
Yes. So I run AM Consulting, and what we do is we bring humanity into the workplace, which I just love offering to people, and I love how people respond when they hear that. And what that means, essentially, we work with mostly mission-driven organizations where we help them become the change they want to see in the world, right? A lot of organizations are doing great work, big work, right? And changing the world, making the world a better place. But oftentimes they forget to bring those same practices that they want to see outside happening into the organization. And so, again, we use a lot of like data and stories and narratives and frameworks and strategic plans. But at the heart of it all, truly, is to bring humanity into the workplace.
So you said AM? I was reading it as AM. So
AM,
can you
yes, that's what I said. I said AM.
Oh, okay. I heard it as AM, and I suddenly was like, oh, I am bringing this humanity. I was like, oh, that's very clever.
Listen, I like that too, though. It's AM Consulting, yeah.
So that's fantastic. All right. So for you, we touched on this a little, and I think it'd be interesting for people to hear what you define as success.
Ooh, oh my goodness. Wow. What I define as success. Listen, I will say I have had quite a journey just with my, as far as my relationship to that word success. It's come a long way. I think if you had asked me this many years ago, I think I would have said things like having a particular title, a particular role. And even though I've always been driven by this, wanting to make the world a better place or leaving it better than I found it, I did recognize that even in my younger years, at the early start of my career, that it's very easy to still get kind of lost in essentially what is capitalism and the harm that capitalism does, right? In many ways, we're socialized to believe that once you have a particular role and a particular title, salary, etc., then you're like making it, you've reached success. And I do recognize it also comes from me originally being from a family where, I'm first gen, right? We're a family of color. I grew up in the South Bronx. There's only one parent in the household. Like there's so many things that in many ways kind of told me that once you are able to provide for yourself and provide for your family, then that means that you are achieving success. But at a very, very young age, I actually received the fancy title and a fancy salary and et cetera. And I started to really assess and think about what success really means, especially when you have these things and you realize there's so much more that really matters in this world. So success for me feels like creating the change that I want to see in the world, being the change that I want to see in the world. Success looks like, or is also living with integrity, right? And feeling like I am a true embodiment of my values, right? So yeah, I really appreciate the question. I really do.
Something you said prompted me to reflect a little. Why does it have to be separated? Like I hear that story a lot from folks where they achieved the goal not just on the show, you read it all the time. Oh, I got the title and I was making $17 million or whatever, and I was empty.
Right.
I mean, and then the other side of it is you people who were really committed to good work, but they were just like, gosh, it was a little more my journey. Like, I was like, man, there's got to be something to this, because this whole like not being able to afford healthcare isn't really great, right? Like, I love serving, I love the work, and there also needs to be some sustainability. So what Altagracia and I met in a book club around anti-racism work. And I feel like that's that division that comes with white supremacy, capitalism, colonialism, is that this idea that we are individuals and so separated and compartmentalized that those two things, what sustains us in our heart and what sustains us in our body, somehow has to be separated, as opposed to that weaving together. I don't know. Yes, that came up for me when you said that.
What's coming up for me with you offering that is, I'm thinking about the just community. Like the term community, what it means to do community. That's something I've been deeply rooted in recently and really have been exploring in different ways. But I really do believe that community is a way that we can heal, we can connect intentionally, that we can have wealth, and not just in the traditional ways that we think about wealth, right? And that we can really care for each other outside of the ways that we think about this capitalist economy, right? But community is a way to kind of offer some of that. What you were just saying, I think it's a technology. I think community is a technology that allows to be possible.
Yeah, I do agree. I feel like that community is the antidote. Being here, taking care of the people in our world.
That's right.
And it's not the glamorous savior thing, right? And it is the thing that I think is actually going to make the difference.
It is. And it's funny you said the word glamorous, and I'm laughing because I was just thinking, I was having a conversation recently where we were talking about how community takes work. It takes a lot of work. And unfortunately, the way we think about work, we think about like labor and 9 to 5, or like, give it, kind of this like backbreaking work, or just mind breaking too. But I think there's this beautiful version of work that can exist. And I think that's what community requires. Love is work. Friendship is work, care is work, like mutual aid is work. All of that is work, and all of it can really be beautiful and sustaining. So,
yeah,
that's glamorous. Maybe that's a little glamorous.
Well, I think that it's powerful, and I think there's a way that it's very restful. I think once you realize that community is, I like the way you say technology to work through some of the changes we want to create, is that you're not alone in this. To go back to that concept of the separation and the individualism, I was sharing with Altagracia, I went to an event last week. It was an Indigenous event here in Colorado. And one of the Lakota elders who spoke said, there is no individualism. We are all part of one another's puzzle. And I thought, that feels so much more real to me than this idea that somehow I have to pull back and be separated enough that I'm not a problem or like in your way or whatever. There's a lot of that, like fear of being a burden, I think. And yet the reality is that in the way we were talking about the work part anyway, that yeah, sometimes friends and family could be a little bit of a burden, and that's okay. Like we lean on each other. It's like when two people lean against each other and then neither of them holding things up as hard, right? Like they put their backs to each other and they can kind of basically be a chair or whatever. And I don't know why that particular type of work is somehow seen as, I don't know, maybe more mysterious than going and punching a clock. It just feels like, because you're saying that, like that does take work, but it's not the same thing. And while we seem to be a nation of workaholics, that community effort doesn't seem to be in the bucket of the things.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's interesting because, this is touching a lot on the difference between like what the Western colonized colonial way of thinking versus more indigenous ways of thinking, I think, or ancestral, which is a term I like to use, ancestral ways of doing work. That's what I'm really reading from what you're offering. And mystery, I think you used the word mystery, right? I mean, listen, I think the reason why it feels like a mystery is because in many ways it feels spiritual, not in a religiosity kind of way, but spiritual, and that it's really connected to something you can't necessarily see, right? It's not like in the
Yeah.
room with us, except in what we feel and how we're connected to each other, right? Like that is where the technology exists, or how it's put into practice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Community.
Love it. Thank you. So, uh, you, there's something in your life and experience that led you to create this. And more than like, so lots of people have, challenges or inspiration or share your identity in some way. And yet, for you, all of that together, there's some spark that turned into, I'm going to create this consulting business. I'm going to create this approach to work. And that, I'm curious always, like, what took all of these things? Was there a moment or something that you can point to that really sparked that shift from knowing or being in whatever it was to, this is what I'm doing about it. This is how I'm showing up now. This
You
is
know,
how I'm
I,
creating.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much for asking that question. I will say that one thing I really do believe is that I'm trying my best to put my ancestral gifts into practice, right? The gifts that the ancestors have brought me into this universe with, I'm like, let me put it into practice. And doing this work really feels like that, right? Because in many ways it is facilitation. I see myself, and I'm really leaning into this identity as a facilitator. But I will say, most recently, when I started this business, I was working as a chief equity officer of a national organization. And I was being asked by many persons to support with like anti-racist work, anti-white supremacy work, creating new systems, right? So I recognized that I was really good at creating systems that challenge the systems that we have now. But I also started to notice and recognize that one of the gifts I was able to bring into spaces is to help unlock people's ability to dream up something beyond what currently exists, right? And I think that's what a lot of folks are kind of missing. And through that exploration, I started to realize, damn, like people are really struggling with the ability to do things like connect with others, like the most basic, what feels like human thing, right? To see someone and say, I can feel connected to you, or I want to feel connected to you, or I'm open to it, and I'm open to seeing how you can change me and how I can change you. I can see how, us even sharing space in this moment, whether it's a moment or, extended period of time because we work together, I can see how we can support each other and be a support to each other. I can see how we're tethered in some way, but the ability to do that, people really struggled with. And so I recognize, like, our practice, AM Consulting, we're able to do those two things. We're able to come into a space and do a kind of like an audit of culture, of what community looks like in the space, of whether the work is truly happening the way it's supposed to, and embedded in all of that through the frameworks and the numbers and the stories and the narratives, and right, is helping people be able to unlock that humanity, right? We're rewriting the way the workplace, what the workplace looks like. For so long, it's been, you keep yourself at home and you bring your workplace person to work, right? This is the separation. But we're really helping people unlock and see and use their imagination and recognize that you can be all things in one place, and it's possible to create an organization, a space, a community, a collective where that is possible, right? And so I think it's a mixture of recognizing a need and also understanding my gifts at the same time and wanting to put that out in the world.
Do you remember the first time you experienced that gift? Like, did it surprise you, or how did you notice it? How did you notice that you could help people unlock something beyond their own field of vision so that they could see farther? What was that?
It was in community with people, just being in community. I've always been a person who just loves, it sounds corny, maybe. I'm okay with that, but I love community. Like I really do. I love the idea of building community. I love connecting with people. I love listening to folks' stories. I love seeing people light up when I ask them questions about their stories. I love celebrating people and helping them see themselves in a different kind of way. That's always been ultra exciting to me. And I do, I feel like in many ways it's, it's not just me recognizing a gift, but I feel like it's also me allowing myself to heal myself across time, because in many ways as a young kid, I'm not sure that I had that community in the same way, and I always searched for it, and I was able to just build it for myself. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what that played a huge role in that. And I guess, going through the world, receiving a lot of positive feedback and seeing the impact that can be made within certain spaces, and seeing that, I recognize that in our world, when we talk about power, unfortunately, a lot of times that power looks like, you know, exploiting someone, right? We
Mm-hmm.
talked about the capitalist system, right? It's typically what the power looks like that we've seen. But then I started to, through community, recognize that love is extremely powerful, care is extremely powerful, reflection is power, right? Like all of those things are power. And so I feel like those are powers that I really had and was able to use to create transformation within organizations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've been working a theory, power with versus power over,
Right.
that a lot of the dominant culture expectations are very power over. It's, you see it sort of everywhere. In the community spaces, indigenous ancestral knowledge is frequently power with. Everybody's sort of a sovereign being, and they step in. So nobody abdicates themselves. There's not the same level of infantilization that you can see also in modern culture of adults. I don't know if you read, it's a little bit of a deviation, but it comes back to it. Like there was a report they did. They actually studied wolves in the wild, and they found that there's no such thing as an alpha wolf. It's a role. Wolves come into that and they come out of it. And they've shown also, they've done more than a few research projects, not that it's necessary, but it's kind of helpful sometimes to realize, like, oh, healthy family systems do the same thing. You have a role someone steps into because they are the one that has the skills, knowledge, tools, whatever. But it's not, there's a fixed point of like the boss, right? And so it's very much a shared communal power with kind of scenario, as opposed to you get everything and we all abdicate. And so just
I
brought
love
that
that.
to mind.
No, that's great. Let's play. I mean, let's even play with that. Like, imagine that being within a workplace,
Right?
right? Like, even the conversation I bring to a lot of organizations is I say, like, this leadership role, again, we think about it very quickly and easily. Organizations will turn into just telling people what to do, right? But you are playing a particular role. It shouldn't be that you are necessarily above, below, etc. Like, you are with the collective. And your
Yeah.
role is to help people cast vision and to believe in it and to have a reason to believe in it, to really buy into it, to feel excited, to feel comforted, to feel a part of something greater than themselves, possibly. Like, that's the role you're supposed to play. But unfortunately, many times people have to heal from their own understandings of what leadership looks like, right? A lot of times
Mm-hmm.
people are performing like the leader they had when they were kind of earlier in their career, and they usually aren't the best examples, right? And so,
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of the healing is you can be something completely different than what you have ever seen. That's okay, right? Yeah.
No, I think, I mean, that's part of why I have the podcast, is that I think that business as usual is causing problems. And so I'm curious as to what people are doing that's unusual, because I feel like that'll lead us in if not a better direction, at least a different one. And that seems worthy to me.
Yeah, because this one is right. Uh-huh.
So in terms of what the work that you're doing, it's not the same as sort of traditional DEI. Can you share like a story, or either a problem you solved or a success that you had, or a moment of joy and connection in the work that you're doing? It gives people sort of a sense of what it means. Like if I'm like, hey, I want to reach out to AM Consulting because I feel like my company needs this. Can you give them a little taste of an example of how that shows up, or how a result or a feeling, so they can maybe connect to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So typically organizations will reach out to us when there's change happening.
Hmm.
And so there is maybe new leadership coming in. It could be a change in like the workplace mood, which a lot of times that looks like tension. It looks like burnout. It could be confusion. It could be a new strategic plan. So persons are looking for a new, like fresh energy into this space. I will offer to folks that while that's a great time to come in, I do recommend to organizations, to whoever is listening, that these are some of the practices that should be embedded into your organization, what we bring in. So Don't ever wait till there's a point where there's tension or, big change, because typically that's when a lot of, I would say, internal conflict can come up. So, but I will say one of my favorite, I think, stories where we created change with this New York City-based organization. And I say it's one of my favorites because I would say out of all of the organizations we have worked with, they were an organization that was experiencing the most internal conflict. And they were so, talk about the inability to dream, right? They couldn't even see beyond their point of tension, right? This was an organization where they had a leader present, and the leader decided to leave after receiving some feedback about their leadership. This person has left. So then those who came in to step into leadership were kind of had to take on this organization that they were not necessarily, they didn't know they would be, leading on their own. And there were a lot of persons within the organization who had communicated experiencing hurt from just having to overcome the challenges that they were experiencing in the moment, hurt from people saying things that maybe were insensitive during a very difficult time, right? And so our process was, one, first making sure that we paused what was happening in the organization. And this is a very extreme example of conflict happening, but we paused what was happening, and we did a 2-day retreat where folks, we spent time away from work, where we were just able to sit, reflect, and really unpack what was happening in the organization. This was the first time the organization had ever, the persons who were part of it, really talked about their own conflict, had a moment to reflect, to kind of open up in a very vulnerable way, to really name the thing that everyone's avoiding having to talk about. From then on, we were able to really draft what the rest of their year would look like, right? So from then, we collaboratively created a strategic plan together that we then started to support the organization in implementing. So we had a team to go in, help them build the infrastructure to make the necessary changes possible so they can live out this new strat plan of theirs, where they were able to decide what kind of organization they wanted to be, what kind of leadership they wanted, to run the organization or support the organization. And I mean, listen, it was really beautiful because there were folks in there who really explicitly named they had never been a part of anything like this. There were persons actually who were a part of the organization's community who hadn't talked to them for a very long time, but were finding their way back to the organization because of this kind of they heard about the process we were going through, and they decided to engage with the organization again, which I thought was really beautiful.
I feel like something you said about, sometimes people wait till conflict shows up. And I know from my own experience of doing different kinds of inclusion work, and being human, I think, is the ultimate inclusion in your workplace, is that sometimes it can expose things. So I just want to put that caveat out there that if you think you're smoothly sailing and you invite AM consulting or someone to come in and suddenly all of a sudden everything is in conflict, it's not because there wasn't conflict before. It's because it was under the surface. And without it being exposed, what that means is usually in times of crisis or change, that's when it bubbles up because people are moving too fast, or the person that was always going around soothing people ends up leaving, or sometimes it's even just that, like a person who is kind of that social emotional glue for the organization gets sick, or they have a cool thing happen and they're less able to focus. And then suddenly it's, what's happening? Why? It was always there.
Oh, of course.
Right? It just didn't get exposed until that. And so
I thank you so much for naming that too, because also, again, we work with both, mission-driven organizations. And a lot of times I've noticed in these organizations, there is a culture of conflict ability that is present. And because they're doing good work and want to do good in the world, and I love these folks who are part of, who decided to do work that is about, again, making a better world. But oftentimes that conflict avoidance turns into a lot of passive aggressiveness. It turns into like, everything's fine. And so they're like gaslighting themselves, each other, right? So that's what's really present. And you also reminded me of one organization we worked with. And also, I love all the orgs we work with. So when I'm naming the tensions, there are also other beautiful things that are happening to make sure they're named as well. But to your point, we had an organization where when we met during the first kind of phase with them and kind of cut the stories, there were a lot of folks who said, things are great. I love this work. I love being here. I love the people I work with. Great. We love to hear that, right? Two things happened. One is we started to ask more specific questions about whether folks were taking care of themselves. And from those conversations, we started to, more was uncovered about how folks were overworking themselves through their love. They love the org, they love each other, but they were overworking themselves to the point where we had folks in tears, communicating how tired they are.
Mm-hmm.
We also discovered through our data, because one thing that we do with any like surveys or any kind of numerical data that we're collecting from folks, we make sure that it is organized by subgroups. So we don't want to hear what everyone is saying, because in this organization I'm talking about, if you looked at collectively their data and some responses to questions that we had, things seem to be going fairly well. It's pretty positive. But when we broke it down by role, rank, tenure, when we broke it down by, gender, race, etc., it starts to tell very different stories for different subgroups. Mm-hmm. So for instance, in this organization, one of the things that we discovered was that folks with less power, hierarchy, were less happy, let's say, significantly less happy than those who had more hierarchical power within the organization. So I think it's a reminder for folks too, that sometimes the conversations you're having, you need to know what specific groups are saying to know the full story, the full narrative. I always say there are 4 layers of data or 4 pieces of data to the full data puzzle. And that is numbers, which we know, stories, which we're familiar with, also historical data, which is the history of the organization. And then I also add ancestral data, which is the data that we bring as individuals, like what stories we bring with us, what is in our ancestry that also is relevant when we are coming together with others with different ancestral data in this space.
I feel like conflict is access to community in a certain way. Like the fear of conflict is often creates this like veneer situation. And it also, one of the things that I both had the experience of and observed is that it creates this bizarre belief that like a conflict will destroy the relationship. And the truth is, yes, there are some things that will. Most likely, that's not going to happen if you simply sit down to say, hey, this thing didn't work for me. This is, or I'm upset or I'm hurt or, depending on the situation. Generally, people actually feel closer after that because they feel that sense of, oh, I can trust you to let me know where we are. I'm not wondering. So there's a lot of relief. And personally, the other thing that I've seen often, it's so sad to me, is frequently people end up being in conflict because to a certain extent, they're trying to help each other. Mm-hmm. Like, it's like, oh, you're going to be busy, so I'll just take on this thing. And then you're like, oh, but I had a plan and you didn't ask. And so then it turns into this thing. Whereas if it was just a conversation and a quick, like, oh, by the way, I'm happy to get help, but ask first or whatever. But for some reason, there's a fear of that part. And then it turns into this big conflagration. Right.
I mean, listen, in order to have a very healthy relationship, conflict is critical. It really is. And, I offer to organizations that you won't be able to really change the world or create the world that you want to see without conflict, because we're in conflict with the status quo, right? Mm-hmm. So we have to become comfortable with conflict as individuals so we can do it as an organization. When it comes to individuals, I do believe in that idea of like dreaming up the kind of relationship you want to have with someone. You have to dream it up and then you have to become it, right? Mm-hmm. I know for me growing up, no one taught me how to be a great friend. I wasn't taught that. I wish I was, and I know some people get that teaching. I didn't get that. And I know most folks don't, as far as what I have seen and what I have heard and what I've learned. But we must kind of use our imaginations to think of what seems to be the dopest, coolest, most loving, caring relationship possible. And how can I lean into that and become that? And it will require some conflict to get to that, especially when I see it as like, 2 people are coming together and they're going to start to, the stories are going to weave into each other and the communities are weaving into each other. And so there's going to be some of that comes up. I believe in building conflict-brave relationships. I believe in building conflict-brave communities. I believe in building conflict-brave organizations. And actually, one of the things that AM Consulting is doing is we're hosting a virtual course on conflict bravery. So on altagraciamontilla.com, the website, under the experiences tab, there is some information about that. I hope that folks lean into conflict and recognize that you have to embrace that in order to become the human that you want to be, in order to have the relationships you want to have, in order to be an organization that can create change in this world. Like, that is a critical point, a part of our narratives as beings. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It doesn't always mean bad things. It can be a very powerful way to overcome, I think, some of that emotional fear too, to simply, like you said, step into that conflict bravery. I love that term.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me about some advice you've received that's influenced the way you approach your work?
Ooh, in the whole long narrative of how I approach my work, some advice that I have received. Whew. I feel like I've received a lot of great advice, right? There's things that I've read that I really appreciate. One, a lot of what I'm talking about, I feel like is rooted into what Robin D.G. Kelly calls freedom dreaming. Mm-hmm. The idea that we're supposed to dream up the world that we want to see, that we need. And as opposed to always thinking about the systems that we're trying to break down and destroy, right? We need to put ourselves in that. We have a framework for emergent design or continuous improvement, that we use. And it's a multi-step process. And a lot of it was inspired by Octavia Butler. All that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you. And the ability to continuously see that the change you create within an organization is going to bring about other change, whether it's good, messy, great, amazing, wonderful, or confusing. That's all things that have to be assessed and a part of it. And I think every single person who has also reminded me along the way, particularly my elders, that my own authenticity is going to not only bring me joy, but also make the work feel more joyful for others, I think is another piece of great advice I've received. I love that question. I'm probably going to I'm sure in the comments of this, I'm probably going to be like, here's this other thing that I just remembered.
Well, maybe I'll have to have you come back and we'll do that little group chat.
Yes, we can do that. That'd be great.
So my experience of running a business and also changing things, doing things unusually, if you will, is that you also need a lot of time to kind of iterate, develop that dream, as well as keep yourself recharged and inspired. So are there ways that you intentionally do that you're willing to share?
Absolutely. My people, for sure. I have a community of people that I absolutely love. Yeah. I have been, I feel very blessed. I feel fortunate. I feel lucky, but I also recognize that I put in that beautiful, amazing, good work to kind of build this community of mine that I love and adore. I pour into them. They pour into me. I have a partner that, oh my gosh, is so good to me. Who I love dearly. I tell folks that, a huge part of why I can put this, beautiful work into the world and I can do this transformative work is because at the end of the day, I get to go home to a home that is loving, and my partner is a part of that. It's loving and caring and important to me for sure. I think a lot of writing is important to me as far as recharging. So journaling, processing thoughts through writing, through art as much as possible. Movement helps to recharge me. So I love dancing. I love to move my body. I love to feel energy in my body. I love to feel energized by movement. And even just as simple as a walk in the park could be really energizing for me. And to music, I think I get lost in music a lot, which is I think really exciting for me.
Yeah, I do. Thank you. For folks that are listening, how do they learn more, follow you, get in touch? What's the best way to connect?
Yes. So I want to thank folks who are listening, right? Thank you. And thank you again for bringing me into your space to connect with me, to reflect with me. This is an example of kind of community in action, right? We met some time ago and here we are, not just recording this, but checking in on each other, really. And altagraciamontilla.com is my website. info@altagraciamontilla.com is a way to reach out to me as well. And then we have LinkedIn, which I'm sure if you search up my name, I'm probably going to be the only person who has to say.
And I'll drop a link in the show notes too, so people can grab that. Yeah.
And then my Instagram is Alta_Monty. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you so much. And thank you for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you again.
And thanks everybody for listening. Appreciate you. Let's see.